Hey everybody, I'm just up late at night and I'm just not able to sleep, so I thought I'd make a video and talk about something that a lot of people might have trouble relating to. So I want to be able to see if I can describe it and so that you can understand it. And so I'm going to talk about delusions. Um, Delusions are basically like an alternate reality. Somebody experiencing a delusion is kind of in their own world, and psychiatry would define it as something bizarre or something abnormal. Although it's a delusion is not necessarily bizarre or abnormal, but it is something false. Um, Even though you can provide evidence against it, even though, like for example, somebody believes that maybe they're 15 years old instead of 40, and it's like, look in the mirror, you're not 15 years old. And they might just say, well, I know I look old for my age, but I'm 15 years old, or whatever. There's no way to talk them out of it, even though it's obviously not true. Somebody who's 40 and believes they're 15 might be bizarre, but maybe there's a woman who believes she's married to a man in the military and he's fighting in Afghanistan. That's not necessarily bizarre, and so if you ever meet or know somebody with schizophrenia or somebody who experiences psychosis and they have delusions that aren't bizarre, you might believe them, what they say about them in the beginning, and then just come to find out later that it's simply not true. But they believe it's true. That's the main thing, is that regardless of what you can say about it, regardless of how you can contradict it with something that's true, they're still going to believe it, and that's because it is just a reality to them. It's kind of like, if I could describe reality in itself, you're watching this video and you're not thinking anything other than you're seeing my face, and you're not seeing the face of a kitty cat or something like that. It's obvious to you. It doesn't require any kind of processing or anything like that. You're in your home, like when you come home and it's familiar and you just don't think anything of it. You take it for granted that it's your home and that's where you live and stuff like that. Somebody who's delusional might walk into their home and say, "This is not where I live." Something about how it feels, or something about it may seem unfamiliar to them, even though a minute ago they looked at their front door and said, "This is where I live," and they walk in and they say, "Whoa, this is not where I live," even though it is. And they might say, "This is not my home. My home is somewhere else. My home is on the other side of town," or something like that. I worked one time with a man who was in the hospital, and he thought he lived across the street from the hospital. That was where his house was, when his house was actually probably about 20, 30 miles away. That's not necessarily a bizarre thing. I know a lot of the psychiatrists say, well, it has to be bizarre in order for it to be a delusion. No, it doesn't have to be bizarre. It just has to be untrue, and it has to be real to the person. And so it's an alternate reality, or just a belief in something that's false. And they truly believe it. It's not based on any evidence or anything. It's just based on, they just have this in their head and they just believe it, regardless of what you may say about it to contradict it. So, if I could express what it on this end of it, what it feels like, it's kind of like being in a dream. I don't know if I've ever talked about that before, but when you dream, you're in this whatever situation or what you're dreaming about or whatever. There's no, like maybe you dreamed that you are in Hawaii and you don't think about how you got there in the dream. You don't think about um, where the money came from to pay for your hotel if you're dreaming about being in a hotel. You don't think about things like that. You just are in Hawaii, and that's just the reality that you're in when you're dreaming. Well, that's what it's like having a delusion. The guy who thought he lived across the street from the hospital, that's just what he thought. And it wasn't based on, he didn't even remember even going to the hospital. He just woke up and he's in the hospital. And sometimes you have delusions about being in a certain place for years and years when you've only been there for maybe a couple of days or something. When I was in the hospital in 2003, I was really sick, and when I left, I was still sick. I had to go live in a group home. I was in that hospital for 2 weeks, and I thought I was only in there for a few days. And I don't know how to explain it, but that's how I felt. And when I realized I was in there for 2 weeks, it was kind of disturbing. That's why you shouldn't really try very hard to challenge the delusions, because the more you do that, it gets very upsetting. It gets very disturbing, and it makes the person feel very, very out of sort, and then they don't know what to think, and then they have a lot of anxiety, and that causes a lot of other bad things to happen. So when somebody's having a delusion, you don't want to just contradict it altogether, because then it messes up their, even when they think about real stuff, it messes it up, because deep down inside they don't know what to think about anything, and then they become very scared of everything that they see and experience, and they might even become violent. So I can give you an example of my experience with a delusion that was challenged. I had a delusion of I was living in the Antelope Valley in California, and years prior to that, years prior to that, I'd gone to refrigeration school, and that was my trade. I was in air conditioning. But I had this delusion that the company that owned the school built a campus in Lancaster, California. And I knew where it was and everything, but it wasn't there. And I was driving down the street to go look at it, and it wasn't there. It was just an empty field on one side. It was where the school was supposed to be, and I thought they had actually built an auto shop on the other side, where people from the school could intern and go work. They also did automotive. They did automotive, air conditioning, and motorcycles and stuff like that. But nothing was there. Where the auto shop was supposed to be, it was a U-Haul place. And where the school was supposed to be, it was an empty field. And that really made me feel very uneasy. But of course, I had reached a certain point in my recovery that I knew I had schizophrenia. So I'm like thinking, okay, it's still real to me. I'm trying to like understand it. This was kind of not necessarily. I kind of felt that feeling before, but this time I wanted to really address it so that I knew I could, because I kind of knew that I would feel that feeling again, and I have at points in my life, how to deal with it. So how I dealt with it with myself was try to go back and find the source of the delusion, because a lot of delusions have sources. They can come from dreams that you don't think are real, that you think are real. because one of the aspects of schizophrenia is that you can't, at least at times, determine between what's real and what's imagined. So it could be, it has something they just imagined and then it just popped into this reality of theirs. It's not in the real world, but it's in their world, and because they just thought of it, or the thought popped into their head. A lot of times, most of the people can relate to thinking things without thinking them. You know, you just have thoughts that popped into your head, either because they were triggered by something else externally, or because everybody just has random thoughts. The difference between a schizophrenic and a normal person is that a schizophrenic, somebody who has schizophrenia, can't turn off those random thoughts. There's something missing in the brain that allows them to just let it just pass on. They have to kind of meditate on it, and sometimes it turns into a delusion. And the way you get through it is to process. You process that thought. So some people have fixed delusions. I'll talk about that in a moment. But if the person is not experiencing fixed delusion, if it's something that really is temporary, when you talk to them, just have them talk about it just like they're talking in a conversation, going through a train of thought. And they'll eventually reach the end of it, and it'll just be like, what was I thinking? Kind of like waking up from that dream, and you say, oh, that was really a weird dream, and you want to tell your friends about it, and it's like, well, what happened in the dream? I don't know, it's just really weird. And because a lot of times, most of the time, delusions don't make sense. And a lot of times when they try to tell you about it, it's going to be very disorganized, and it's going to be very incohesive. The person might just be really sick, and you just might get a word salad out of them. For example, they might have a delusion that is bizarre, but it's incohesive. So it's like, what's going on? Oh gosh, the rats. What rat? In Asia, the rainbows, or this ice cream and the locust, or something like that. They'll just spew out these things about what's going on in their mind, but it's just a bunch of thoughts that are kind of like just a whirlwind of random thoughts that are to them a single experience, but to somebody on the outside, it's very it's almost like if looking at static on a screen or something that doesn't look like anything, but to the person who's experiencing delusion, it looks like something that makes sense to them. And so just have them talk about it. Direct them to talk more if they stop talking. Don't feed into the delusion, though. Don't do that. Don't, like, if somebody says, oh, I'm Jesus Christ, and you say, oh, I'm a Christian, I love you, and whatever. Don't do that. If somebody has a fixed delusion, then what happens is it's just something they always think, and it's something that always follows them everywhere they go, and it's a part of their life. And you want to try to direct them to a point where it's not disrupting their ADLs, and it's not disrupting their interactions with other people, and it's not disrupting their employment and all that. But they'll always have those delusions. You just have to accept that about the person. Don't feed into it, but at the same time, don't constantly challenge it either, because it'll just upset them. So what you do is, it's very similar as somebody who's in delusion is not fixed. Just have them process it until until it kind of falls by the wayside, and then it'll just be with them the rest of their life. And when they have their little episodes, just again have them process and have them talk about it. So, but it is real to them, and it is a part of their life, and it might even be something that shapes who they are, and you just have to accept people for who they are, even if it is abnormal. I honestly don't see anything wrong with being abnormal. I think abnormal people are very interesting and very fun and very enjoyable people to be around. And so do my friends. So that's why they're my friends, and that's why they like me. So I know delusions can lead to dangers. You know, it can lead to somebody being dangerous to themselves or other people. Direct them away from those dangers, direct them, but you got to be there for them. So that's the thing. When somebody has a mental illness, if somebody comes to you and says, hey, I was just diagnosed with a mental illness, and well, this is what it is, and the first thing you should say is, I'm there for you. And just being there for the person is enough to help them get through it. You don't necessarily have to understand it. I know being schizophrenic, it feels very lonely. I sometimes wish I could find a peer support specialist that has schizophrenia. Peer support specialists I've had providing that peer support to me didn't have schizophrenia. They had usually mood disorders like bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety. I've worked with somebody who had borderline personality disorder. I worked with somebody who was bipolar, another one who had depression. But currently work with peers. I won't talk about them, but only because that's immediate in my life. I don't want to talk too much about people who don't want me talking about them. But schizophrenia is definitely difficult to relate to if you don't have it. But that doesn't mean you can't be empathetic. Empathetic means you feel them. So a lot of times people, when I'm in my job, in the past 4 or 5 years I've been doing this, people come to me with stuff that I don't understand what they're talking about. But I'm just like, I don't know what you're talking about, dude, but whatever it is, I feel you. I feel you. If it's that they're in distress, I'm like, okay, you're going through something. What can I do to help you? And let them tell you don't tell them what they need. Let them tell you what they need, and then try to do your best to provide that. Don't tell them what to do. Let them tell you what they want to do, what their immediate goals are. If you're a provider and you're watching this, if somebody comes to you, it's not because they have a deficit. If they think they have a deficit, you need to change that thought, because deficits are not, you can't utilize something in a person towards their recovery that they don't have. But instead of looking at them as deficits, you look at them as needs, and the services you're providing are to fulfill those needs. But those needs need to pertain to their recovery goals, and they need to define their own recovery. I understand there are certain things that recovery is not, so if they say things like, well, I define recovery as the mental illness going away, and that's never going to happen, so I'm never going to recover. As a provider myself, I would say, well, that's just not, I would tell the person that's not realistic. Why would you even engage in treatment if you don't feel that you can recover? The reason why the person is seeking treatment is because they want to recover. Why would you seek treatment if you don't think the treatment is going to be effective? There might be an answer to that, and when they do answer that, then you can build a service plan and a treatment plan on that. But I've kind of gone off the subject of delusions. But if somebody does have delusions, they might not be able to understand the treatment planning process, and they may need to have somebody kind of help them out, a third party, an advocate, even a guardian, for temporarily. So, but yeah, that's delusions, and it's not the worst thing in the world to believe something that's false. A lot of people believe false things anyway. Religions and things like that, false religions, and of course some people say my religion is false, and I'm like, I mean, how do you prove or disprove that? They provide evidence against it, but I always still seem to be able to justify it with evidence for it. So all that's left is an ambiguity. But a delusion that somebody is Jesus Christ, so a delusion that the government has implanted a chip in them, so a delusion that somebody has a brain tumor, that the test results all show negative, that person is going through something, and what you need to first do is acknowledge that they're going through it and be empathetic. And the next thing you need to do is listen. And when you direct them to process that delusion, process that thought, that's really all it is, do it by asking open-ended questions and let them come up with the answers until the delusion falls by the wayside or it is completely diminished or extinguished. So that's all I have to say. Thanks for watching. Still trying to redo the blog, but I appreciate you watching these videos, and like I've said in previous videos, I do them for my own therapy. So I like it's kind of like a lot of positive self-talk, and I might do a video on positive self-talk where you'll see me talking to myself in the video saying, Will, you're good enough, you're smart enough, and gosh darn it, people like you. I know that's kind of a parody of a certain type of therapy, but that actually really does work. As pathetic as you may think it is, it's not pathetic. Telling yourself things that are negative and it makes you have low self-esteem, why wouldn't it work the opposite way, telling yourself things that are positive and it raises your self-esteem? And when your self-esteem is raised, then your esteem for other people whom you're relating to will be raised as well, and you'll start treating yourself better, you'll start treating other people better. So I'll do a video like that. Anyway, God bless you, thanks for watching, and leave a comment if you like.